Hi, my name is Kate Pappas. I'm a documentary producer in Melbourne, Victoria, and I have the privilege today of interviewing Liz Marshall, an esteemed multi-award-winning documentary filmmaker from Canada. Today we're going to be looking at her slate of films, which often cover quite complex issues that deal with humans' impact on the world that we live in. And we're going to talk about how we can use film as as an agent for change and the different craft methodologies and processes that we can use to gain, I guess, maximum impact. So it's going to be a really sort of deep dive into how to make change through film. So I'm very privileged to have this conversation with Liz today. It's going to be great. And we have to thank the wonderful Environmental Film Festival Australia for making this happen. So thank you, everybody. And I hope you enjoy our masterclass today. Welcome, Liz.
Hello, and it's great to have you, Kate, moderating this conversation.
Thank you. So I think we should just start with basics and just, for those who don't know your work, Liz, if you wouldn't mind just talking to us about how you became a documentary filmmaker and what your pathway to getting to where you are now was.
Sure. I love this question. I get asked sort of the backstory, origin story question. And what I tend to say is similar to, what I'll say right now is that, there was not a sort of cookie cutter path for me to follow. Instead, I did forge my own way, following instinct. You have to have that passion. It is a passion-driven field that requires, perseverance and a tremendous amount of curiosity about people and about the world. I also believe that you need to have a real sense of desire or drive to understand your own moral compass. And that can really, at a certain point, really kick in for you and guide your journey. So for me, just briefly, I started on my path in filmmaking back in the early 90s when I did my undergraduate at Ryerson University in Toronto. I didn't really know at that time that nonfiction was the form of filmmaking that I would really sink my teeth into. It just was something that organically, naturally happened. I sort of rolled up my sleeves and was very passionate about image making. And so I was behind the camera. I loved editing and learning all the craft and the what it takes to, not only be driven by content, but by form. So I've always equally been driven by content and form because they are just so clearly companions in this language of filmmaking. Then what happened was I dove into, getting out into the world and needing to work. And so I worked in television for a number of years. And that was really good training because you have to come up with ideas, execute those ideas, move on to the next very quickly. I also worked as a videographer, and I was one of the only female videographers working in Toronto at the time. So that was cool to, embrace that. And then, just that sort of rapid cog in the machine system or machine that television really is, I got kind of burnt out in that, and I realized I want to do long form storytelling. And I also realized I was very interested in social justice issues and ultimately people who are making a difference in the world. What makes them tick? Why do they do what they do? And the tremendous resilience in the world that exists, the human condition, the spirit of change and transformation. Those are the themes that I've always been very drawn to. I don't think I had that I don't think that was a cognizant sort of awareness at the time. I was just following it. And like I said earlier, forging ahead and trusting my instincts. And what really shifted my path towards social justice and environmental documentary storytelling is a job that I landed in the early 2000s with War Child Canada. And I was their media director. And I found myself traveling around the world to war zones. And that was a crash course in, you know, it was traumatizing in some ways. How could it not be? But, you know, I was fueled by it. And I think just in my heart of hearts, committed myself at that time to using my skills and my passion for filmmaking towards wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to explore and illuminate subject matter and people that are obscured or not celebrated or you know, needing a platform, because documentary is a powerful platform. So anyways, fast forward years later, I then got involved in making long form documentaries, which I know we'll talk about today. But I think that is really a good snapshot of my backstory.
I think it's a few interesting things in there. Like, one is the idea of, you know, working in television as it's kind of like boot camp for filmmaking, isn't it? You learn, like you say, you make really quick decisions. You learn how to structure a story and put all the narrative together in a really kind of quick form, and then you're equipped then to then head off and, you know, make feature-length documentaries and make some of those hard decisions that you know, I know that a lot of first-time feature documentary filmmakers struggle with. You know, what stories do you follow, which ones do you not do? And then having that kind of background in television, I'm sure, helped you sort of be a bit more decision efficient in that kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of timing, I think, is really interesting as well. There's always these sort of events in people's lives that turn them towards, that sort of redirect them in a certain way. And your War Child kind of experience has kind of put you on this pathway to doing what documentary is really meant to do, which is illuminate, like you say, giving voice and shining a light on the voiceless. So with that in mind, I guess it'd be good to find out, like, how do you choose, now that you're on that pathway, how do you choose the stories that you do? Do you choose them? Do they choose you? How do you kind of come about?
It's a great question. I think it's a combination of both. So I think that, you know, as a filmmaker, you're actively always, there's a part of your brain that is always on. You're always actively seeking or looking or aware of the world and people and stories around you. And so that part of you never sleeps, because it's also present in our dream world as well. And it's the part that is seeking the next project. And then at the same time, opportunities offer themselves, doors open, you meet people, one thing leads to the next. So, you know, I'll just talk briefly as a way of also introducing the first clip that we'll show from my first feature-length documentary called Water on the Table. And it features Maud Barlow, who is an iconic Canadian activist. And she's an author and a public figure, really. And she's a water warrior, self-defined. And I read her book called Blue Gold about the world water crisis. And I contacted her, and the response by her was so immediate, and our connection was so clear and strong right from the get-go. I just dove right in. I felt this connection to her and her work and the topic. And so let's play a clip from Water on the Table.
Maud Barlow, Mary, what an honor to meet you.
Well, forward to yours.
That was wonderful. Comments, thank you so much. I'm going to talk about women and water, the right to water. So we will be on the same wavelength.
The proliferation of states during the 20th century led to a very deep differentiation
in the reality of state power across the world.
Since the signature of the Declaration, our country has made tremendous progress. Still, much remains to be done.
How to further mainstream the universality and cohesiveness of all human rights in a way that celebrates diversity. Thank you.
There are 24 agencies at the United Nations tasked with different parts of the water story, and they're very keen to have the support of people who want to move this in a more systemic way to the political level.
It is with a sense of urgency that I urge the nations here today to give priority to extending the human right to water. Is water a common good like air, or is it a commodity like Coca-Cola? Who is being given the right or the power to turn the tap on or off? The people, governments, or the invisible hand of the market? What is needed now is binding law to codify that states have the obligation to deliver sufficient, safe, accessible, and affordable water to their citizens, and it must become self-evident. Let us commit here today in remembrance of all of those who fought so hard to create the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights to a water-secure world for all, based on the principles of water protection and watershed renewal, equity and justice, and the right of all living things to water for life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Marlowe, for that excellent presentation.
I'm afraid of running out of time on this mission and just not being able to get there fast enough to stop. What I really do see is a crisis of monumental proportions.
So basically, Water on the Table was released in 2010, and production took place in 2008 and 2009. And what happened miraculously is that Maud was ushered into this incredible international role during production of Water on the Table. She became the special advisor at the United Nations on water. And so we got to film her in that capacity. And yeah, that was, a decade ago that the film was released. And as you say, it's, and it will become increasingly probably the most urgent global issue of our times.
It's very prescient. So just going back to you sort of Red, Blue, Gold, you messaged Maud, you guys had this instant connection, and then it comes back to this thing that happens so often in filmmaking, which is timing, in the right place at the right time, where you've got this incredible character who is going on to an adventure. You don't know what it is yet, but then now all of a sudden she's front and center of the global sort of water crisis, which is quite incredible. When you first embarked on the journey with Maud, how did you go about it? Did you say, I have an idea for a film, I'm not sure what it is yet, or what was the sort of initial approach?
No, I absolutely knew that I wanted to make a film about water and the water crisis. And for me, it starts usually with the bigger underpinning. So, the moral issue at hand. But then what is the approach? How do you tell such a story? And for me, my modus operandi, my approach always is to make it character driven. And Maud Barlow is just absolutely, the perfect person to tell that story. She's devoted her whole life to this mission. And she's just brilliant. So it was an honor and a privilege to be able to feature her in a feature-length documentary. I was able to get behind the scenes, meet her family, follow her over the course of a year. And so that's really, but it was my first long-form documentary. So I learned so much about long-form storytelling, which is very different than creating shorter, tighter pieces that are perhaps more survey-driven or more issue-driven and not so character-driven. But after making Water on the Table, I realized I want to move forward with this form, this genre of long form feature length documentary films.
And just for some of our audience members who may not know what survey driven means, do you want to just explain that quickly?
Sure. So when I say survey driven, what I mean is that it's more of it's thesis oriented, or you jump around from person to person or location to location. You don't necessarily stick with an individual as that thread throughout, but rather you explore a topic from various angles. It's much more journalistic often, although my work has a small j journalistic approach for sure, but it means that you kind of explore a topic from multiple angles, and it's not character driven. That's not the sort of in terms of Water on the Table as an example, and my other work, the author is me, but the protagonist, the central character in the film, it's through their point of view. So there's a personable quality to it that makes it more emotional and makes it more relatable to a broad audience. And that's absolutely my goal in making character-driven films.
Well, that's a really interesting point, sort of the benefits of character-driven films, particularly on issue-based topics. We'll probably dive into that more in a tick. Before we get there, though, I think it's something I noticed about your films is that you're often the writer, director, and producer on them, which is, wearing quite a few different hats there. So I just wondered, how do you manage that process? How does the producer talk to the director and argue with the writer?
Yeah, I think it's so. How I understand that is that the producer side of me is one side of my brain, and the writer director is the other side of my brain. So the producer obviously is, really all about logistics and big picture thinking and planning and strategy. And then the writer director side of my brain is more in an expansive kind of space around creativity and around story. What is the story? It can be very intellectual as well when you're telling a nonfiction film. But to bring those parts together, that's actually has never been challenging for me, because both sides of my brain work, as companions. I also think that the documentary genre industry demands that you have to wear multiple hats. It's different than fiction in that regard, because sometimes these stories can take years, and unless you have a really strong collaborator that you're working with who's equally committed and passionate about your story, who's working with you along the way, which is hard to find. You're kind of, in a way, you're on your own from the very beginning to the very end. But then, of course, you need a strong team. You can't do this by yourself. So yes, I wear multiple hats, but I also honor and need the strength of the team that I work with. I would say I'm naturally a writer, director, producer. They go together for me in this genre of documentary.
A sort of synergy of skills that kind of enable each other. You can't really have a producer that's got no film to produce. You can't really have a director who hasn't got someone to raise the financing or pull all the logistics together. So it's kind of, two halves of the whole. I think we're going to watch a clip now from one of your more recent films, Meet the Future. Do you want to talk a little bit about it before we go to the clip? Sure.
So it's wonderful that the Environmental Film Festival of Australia is screening Meet the Future. Meet the Future is a 2020, I like to say, COVID pandemic film release. And it's interesting because the topic is meat, M-E-A-T, and it is focused on, a visionary CEO and co-founder of a startup company called Memphis Meats. And so the main character of the film, his name is Uma Valetti. And it's through his journey in getting this huge idea off the ground. And we were there with privileged behind the scenes access starting back in 2016. And we were able to follow a trajectory of 3.5 years, which is unusual for a film, but it was very necessary for this kind of film because it's ultimately about the birth of an industry. And I'll just quickly unpack what that is. So cell-based meat is a revolutionary innovation of growing real meat from animal cells. So it's like from the cells up as opposed to from the animal down. And the advent of this new industry means, the elimination ultimately of the need to breed, raise, and slaughter billions of animals. So it's really a game changer. And let's show a clip and then we can talk about it.
Oh my God, that would be so...
The meat industry knows that they can't meet the demand of the people. And if the demand for meat is going to double by 2050, there is just no method of production that they have at their disposal now that would satisfy that hunger for meat. There just isn't.
Uma, would you just take your hands and clap them in front of your face like that? Perfect. Okay, everybody speeding?
Yep.
Okay, anytime, Uma.
So March 14th, 2017, that is today, team, we are here to do something that has never happened in the history of humanity. Thank you, guys. Thank you for being here.
I got the privilege of watching this film the other day, and I highly recommend it. It's an excellent film. Just the sort of thoughts about the possibilities for the future that you have while watching it are quite incredible. But I guess there's one of the characters in the film, Mark Post, says that media attention is often greater than public interest, which I think we can say about a lot of different issues. And so I guess, how do you as a filmmaker make, agricultural business or lab-grown meat, a really engaging, human-driven character story that will, have the power to change people's minds or attitudes about something? How do you do that? It sounds very hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the question that plagues me the entire time. It never leaves, because first of all, I've committed myself to making a film about something that most people want to turn away from. And by the way, just for our viewers, I chose that clip specifically that highlights the scale and magnitude of conventionally produced industrial animal agriculture. It's the only time in the film that we actually see images like that, because the rest of the film is laser focused on this big new idea, which is a potential huge solution. And that clip that we just saw is also paired with, press media clips focused on environmental impact. And because this is an environmental film festival, I'm just so excited to be able to make that equation between animal agriculture and the climate emergency. And so it's a topic that is being talked about, in through that lens more and more and more by mainstream media. And that's very exciting. So to answer your question though, in terms of, how do you make a film about such a challenging subject matter? Meat is personal. Meat is visceral. Meat is emotional. Food is emotional. It's personal. It's not, a pragmatic, intellectual topic. We need to eat every day. We need protein to survive and to thrive. Yet the transnational global industrial system is deeply flawed for so many reasons, and we need solutions. So yeah, how do you make a film about that people actually want to watch? It's a great question. I hope that I achieved that with this film. I guess, we've been reviewed widely at this point. We had a great feature review by Variety magazine and all kinds of other press outlets around the globe who are saying that it's compelling, that it's fascinating, that they want to watch it. And I think largely that's because of the timing. Timing is everything. We talked about when did Water on the Table come out? That was 10 years ago, 2010. But it's even more timely now. If that film were to be released today, it would be something, it's more in our consciousness. Back then, I think it was timely because it wasn't in our consciousness as much as it needed to be. Today, making a film about the environmental crisis and industrial meat production and the need for innovative, solution-focused, exciting stories that are, all about change makers, that's timely, especially during, a global health pandemic that is created by a zoonotic disease. COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease. And that is from germs, bacteria, viruses that jump from animals to humans. And we can trace it all through our history, going back to, for example, the Spanish flu. So we need to tell these stories, but always the crux of it is, how do we tell these stories? So for me, it's got to be character driven. And it's also got to follow something that is unfolding, that is active. And so with Meet the Future, we just had that tremendous privilege to be able to be there sort of, at ground zero, so to speak, during the genesis phase of the birth of an industry, and to have that privileged exclusive access. So I think all of those things combined hopefully make it the compelling film that it needs to be, that people want to watch.
I mean, I think COVID-19 is an interesting thing to bring up now, because if we look at, it's sort of undeniable, the human encroachment on the natural world has and will continue to increase, the spillover events and, jumps into zoonotic diseases, which will affect how we live our lives, regardless of our politics or ideology around, say, animal justice, or, sort of, it kind of supersedes all of that. So if we look at the sort of ideas that are in Meet the Future, it's actually doesn't really matter if you value animals' lives in that particular way. We're actually looking at it from a human point of view. This is a really a science and a solutions-based approach to a problem that we can't ignore. What I think is interesting in how you've approached it is that it's a very polarizing and very emotional space, but the film itself is incredibly understated. The first sort of 16 minutes of the film are very much very deep science, sort of understanding like the technology that's involved in sort of soil growing meat, and you get to meet these sort of personalities. And it's not like you said before, the clip that you showed is probably the only time in the film where you really get hit with the scale and the impact. But what you've done is you've brought us into the science, the solutions, and these characters. We kind of through that get to understand that there is a really interesting solution coming around. So I think that's for me as a science filmmaker, it's interesting looking at how you can use science and characters to kind of, without, hammering the message home, and driving people away often, just sort of bring people to the idea of solutions and the idea of, alternate ways of seeing the problems that we have. And I think that's, it's a real achievement. So.
Thank you.
But just sort of looking at science and filmmaking, like how do you approach, science sort of intersecting the environmental aspects of it? Because the environmental films sort of fall into a lot of different categories. Some are science-based, some are sort of advocacy films, others are kind of solutions-based. And how do you approach that in your work?
Well, first of all, this is the first film that I've made that has focused on something about science and technology, and also about the birth of an industry. So, food regulation, for example, is a whole new topic for me. And so it's always that process of being a learner and that process of discovery as you move along. And then at the end, you're a small E expert on a topic, on a subject matter. I would say that it was always our goal, and certainly in the edit suite, working with amazing editors, the balancing act is remembering that this is not a science film. It never was, for me, a science film. But science, understanding it, unpacking this big new concept to the world in those scientific terms, because it is science, was essential. And as you said, the first 16 to 20 minutes of the film has to do that. It has to introduce the world to, okay, what is this? And has to do it in a way that is not too cumbersome, not too inside baseball, but also not dumb, So it's finding that balance of creating a smart film that is not alienating, that unpacks a big new idea and then moves forward, while humanizing it through people that are the game changers, the people that are risking everything to get it off the ground and conceive of it. And that was really, the humanizing part is so important to me as a filmmaker, because you ultimately want it to speak to many people. You want people to relate to these people, or find points of connection. And so, you know, centering the story around Uma Valetti and understanding his backstory, going to India where he grew up with him. That's a very important scene in the film. But you know, you're the science filmmaker expert. What do you think? Is this a science film? Is this how would you define this film?
I think it's a hybrid film. I think categories like that can be misleading, because I don't think that things have to be mutually exclusive. And broadcasters and commissioners always like to put things in particular boxes, like, is it an art film or a history film or an art history film? It can't possibly be both, even though you can't actually have one without the other. And I think, you know, telling science through human stories is important. I think it's really, like you say, humanizing a topic that is like, you know, cells grown in a lab is not, you know, oozing with humanity, but if you find the people behind it and why they're doing it and what drives them and how they work together and the challenges that they're overcoming for, like, ultimately the greater good, is actually really compelling. And I think it's finding the balance between going too far into the tech or too far into the emotion, which kind of leads to my next question. Like, during the filmmaking process for, I guess, you know, most of your films, it's the kind of, how do you work out the balance between driving the emotion home and the kind of factual accuracy? I'm not saying for a minute your films aren't factually accurate, but there's always a kind of delicate balance that we play as filmmakers with how we communicate, what we don't, and which things we leave in and which we take out.
Again, it's a dance. It's finding that fine line, and then, you know, trying to create that balance. And it's about tone, it's about voice and perspective. So if you're making a character-driven film like I do, but it's ultimately about a big issue. In other words, it's not really a biopic. It's really more about the topic, the subject matter, respectfully using a person as a point of entry, and humanizing the idea through that approach. So in terms of facts, you know, so important to get it right. So important to not be didactic. So important to also have that personal lens. So I said earlier, small j journalism and not capital J journalism, because there's got to be room for cinematic language, emotion, and that's so key to filmmaking for me. If to have an impact, it has to balance truth telling. And then, of course, you know, especially in today's age of, you know, what is it? The post-truth era? Terrifying. You know, truth telling is essential. And to me, that means being a witness to something. It doesn't mean hammering something over someone's head. Because I believe in giving people space to formulate their own experience and their own outcome. At the same time, I believe in guiding someone on an emotional experience journey where they can be impacted intellectually and emotionally. So heart and mind have to go together. So it's a dance, it's a process, and you have to do your research every step of the way. But at the same time, you can't laden and weight your film with, you know, too many voices, too many facts, too many, you know, I can't anyway. I know there's lots of documentaries that do that. Whether they fail or not, that's up to the viewer. But for me, I can't sort of go about it in that way. You'll notice in that clip that we watched, there's no voiceover, and there's not a heavy-handed way of working with music. And the images speak for themselves. And they're dramatic images. These are images that people either don't want to look at. So again, there's the challenge right there. Or images that are just so hidden from our view, and in fact illegal to even get in many places now due to ag-gag legislation. So it's a process between truth-telling, a measured small j journalistic tone, which comes from good research and the way things are put together, and then the emotion, which is so crucial in telling a human story. Yeah, these things are always top of mind, and you wrestle with them all the time, and you work with a great team to achieve it. And maybe you don't achieve it, maybe you fail miserably, but failing is part of the process. And I think we're succeeding well with this film. I mean, we need to still get it sold so that it's available across the globe, and has that incredible exposure. You know, I'm working with a great sales agent to get the film out there, Met Film Sales in the UK. But, you know, I'll just say, you know, this is a master class, but a master is never really a master. You're always a learner. You're always, and hopefully your latest work is always your best work, in some ways. So.
Yeah, I think it's, I just think, you know, as documentary filmmakers, living in the post-truth age is incredibly alarming. I just want to say that out loud. It's sort of like, how do you...
Thank you.
How do we manage...
Hallelujah.
How do we manage what is considered truth and what is not, which is a whole separate masterclass. However, I think sort of touching on emotional impact in that last section, which leads us nicely to where we're going to go now. So I think we should show the clip from Ghosts, and then we'll talk about how do you create emotional impact in particular scenes and in films. So
sure. I can just set this clip up very quickly. So The Ghosts in Our Machine is the documentary about animal rights that was released in 2013. And it's absolutely, you're right, it is considered an emotional film for sure. And it poses a big moral question to the world. And we'll talk about it after this clip. But this clip is basically the introduction of the film.
The question of morality as it relates to the human-animal relationship is a huge question. It's the next big hurdle of social moral development that humans need to cross. I say next because it's already underway. We're becoming much more aware of that.
By any of the data. The fact is that all animals are sentient, and humans are animals. And we share the basic property of emotions, pleasure, and pain with other animals. This is the basic
that spectrum of experience that we call sentience. Sentience means the capacity to feel. It really refers to a whole spectrum of feelings, from the agony of the worst sorts of pain to the ecstasy of the best sorts of pleasure. The sentient beings ourselves.
The science is there, and it is growing by the minute. And we are deliberately ignoring it because it is inconvenient to recognize it. Sentience is a concept. That's where the emotional research is.
Now, animals definitely have emotions, but that doesn't mean that they're people. There's one big thing in the brain that separates people from animals, the size of the cortex. We've got raw computer power that animals don't have. Animals are not going to fly to the moon. Intellect is what separates people from animals, not emotion.
It really is the solution to all our ills. Someone once said that animals are another nation. They're not aliens, they're not property, they're not dangers, but rather they're other beings with whom we share life, who have as vested an interest in their own lives as we do. All we need to do is make certain that we don't become the plague, the vermin that takes it all over, but rather make sure that there's always room for them. Because without them, we'd be one hell of a lot more prey.
What a powerful clip. I've seen that a few times now, and every time it just it really kind of resonates. I've got so many questions to ask you about this film, but I think we should start with perhaps just sort of referring back to what we were talking about before in terms of which voices do you include in films. And just going back, I guess I wanted to talk to the point about, you talk about research, you talk about knowing your subject well enough, I think is what you're getting at, is knowing your subject well enough to know what to include and what not to include, and to have your kind of questions ready for, I guess, your possible critics. And I imagine a film like Ghost in Our Machine would have had a lot of supporters in the first instance, but also a lot of people who react quite strongly to the message that you're sort of driving at with that particular film. So I guess my question is, you know, how did you prepare for that when making this film? And then we can talk about, I guess, which I think will link into the emotion and how you kind of create emotional impact, and, you know, what was your strategy, I suppose?
Sure. So The Ghost in Our Machine, as we said earlier, was released in 2013. And it had a very, very, very strong core audience. You know, we started our outreach and engagement process during the making of the film. And we really attracted very quickly a global following. And the film focuses on Joanne MacArthur, who is an animal rights photojournalist. And it really elevates her work in the world. And yes, so I won't give away anything. Please watch the film, obviously. But I think your question was twofold. One, we're going to talk about impact, right? But I also think, and emotion, because it is an emotional film for sure. But also, like we've been talking about up until this point, it's character driven. So through the lens of a photographer, we're able to meet a cast of characters, which are the animals that she photographs around the globe. And so, you know, it was really interesting to give screen agency to animals. Mm-hmm. And these are the animals, of course, that are hidden from our view largely, because they're used for, you know, within different industries, for our food and for research and for entertainment and for, you know, fashion. So it is a big, huge topic and such an important one. And we were able to reach, you know, a lot of people with this film. And I would say that in terms of, to answer your question about the critics, it was polarized. It was either very celebrated and received in a positive light, or it was received in a, I'm not necessarily negative, but extremely critical light. But it was received, and that's the main point. And no, I honestly, you never know how your film will do in the world. You just don't. There's no way to predict or gauge the temperature, the climate, the, you know, the reception. we worked with a great team of publicists who were able to, get the film out there. But that appetite to watch it and review it was huge on both sides of, whether it was, kind of, trashed, or whether it was really celebrated. So I think for me, that was the first time that I'd experienced something like that. And very quickly, what I observed about myself is that my observer function kicked in pretty early on. I was able to, thankfully, kind of have a 10,000 foot view on it. I was able to observe it almost in an anthropological kind of way, because I didn't take it personally. I really saw it as part of the greater story, which is because often they weren't even, from the critic side of things, they weren't necessarily even talking about the film as a film. They were talking about the topic. And so I was really, I think, able to have a critical distance from the reception. And it was like being part of a movement. And it was exciting. I was able to travel the world with the film for 18 months off and on. And Joanne MacArthur, who's featured in the film, she was able to also travel with the film too. So it was a privilege. It really was to do that.
I think the idea of it being received is so important. Like, it doesn't matter how it was received, it's been received. And so all of a sudden you're able to make a lot of noise around a topic. And if people are agreeing or disagreeing, they're having a conversation about it. So in a way, it's almost, job done. Not completely, because then you've got to, how do you make change from that? But, there's something successful in how you've approached it that has caught the attention of, of the audiences and critics alike. So in terms of, just looking at how you create emotion or how you manage the use of emotion in that film, what was the process that you went through to balance that? Because it is quite it's a very it can be quite traumatic. I think that the sort of things that are contained in that film and in that area to do with animal sort of slaughter and animal experimentation and all those sort of things. So how do you manage how much you share and how much you pull back on, and when you choose to do those things within the film?
It's really a gentle approach to a haunting and dramatic subject matter. And the impact of it is that over the course of 90 minutes, your blinders are slowly removed. And at the end, you're sort of hit with, wow, I am not wearing blinders right now. I see all the animals that are in everything that I consume, that I'm complicit in. I see the machine that's my machine. That's why it's called The Ghosts in Our Machine. And it's not a finger wagging movie. It's not a shaming movie at all. It's a consciousness raising documentary about a topic that people would rather look away from, or who people don't know anything about, frankly. So, but I know that most people love animals. The vast majority of people love animals. So it goes to your heart, but it makes you think too. I think that's an important combination, is the heart and head together. And it is that kind of film, but it's more emotive because Joanne MacArthur, the protagonist, is a photographer, and you feel her heart in the film, and you feel her mission and her worldview. And her worldview is communicated not only through the words that she speaks, but through the images that she takes. And she views animals, all of them, as sentient beings, deserving of rights and protection. And that's really the strength of the film, is that the film, there's layers to it, so Yeah, and it's like the little sister to Blackfish. For those of you who have seen the very impactful documentary called Blackfish, about orcas and SeaWorld. Highly recommended documentary. That was released the same year as The Ghosts in Our Machine, and so we were on the heels of a single issue film, and when I say single issue, I mean it's laser focused on SeaWorld and the use of whales and dolphins for entertainment, whereas The Ghosts in Our Machine is about all animals and the use of animals for our consumer goods.
It's a great kind of companion piece, isn't it? I think you described how you see all the animals now. Like, it's a really interesting concept, and there's the sort of latest, I think, concept that's similar to that that's coming up is the idea of plant blindness, where we have become really disassociated from the trees that we live with, and the idea of like sort of shedding the scales and just being really cognizant that they're there. So it sounds like it's sort of similar experience with animals, and how animal products and animal things are actually really much ingrained in how we live our lives now, and just being a bit cognizant of that is quite powerful. One of the other incredible things about, one of the many incredible things about this film is actually the impact strategy that you guys sort of had from the get-go. Impact is it's become a bigger thing now with documentary films. It's often rolled into the budgets and the strategies, and is a lot of documentaries won't be commissioned without it. But this film started in 2010 for you, and I believe impact has been part of that from the get-go. Do you want to talk to us about how that came about, and how you framed the film with the idea of a public engagement strategy from the get-go, and how that was sort of financed? And let's start there, and I'll ask more questions as we keep going.
Okay, well, there's an official impact report that people can just download from the ghostsinourmachine.com website, and it is full color, filled with a linear map that charts the strategies, the journey, and then the qualitative and quantitative metrics that we were able to measure through a global evaluation that we conducted at the end of what was a 5-year outreach and engagement campaign. So in 2015, we were able to actually do a global evaluation, and you can learn about how we did that in the report. And then we were able to analyze those results, and then write about them and present them in the report. And that report was took a lot of synthesizing and bringing things together. And it's a remarkable document because it shows the life and the life of one project, and how it moved in the world. It still moves in the world everywhere, but how it moved in the world during that particular period of time, and how it touched people's lives, and how it impacted attitudes and also behavior. Because people were constantly saying, this film has changed me. And we were like, well, how has it changed you? We wanted to understand how it was changing people. So the Doc Society funded the report and our ability to have a global evaluation. And I worked with a wonderful team on this report. So Che Green, who is the founder of an organization in the US called Faunalytics, is just brilliant. And he provided the tools and the methodology around, the evaluation. And then we worked together, and then he analyzed those, and, that's like his wheelhouse to be able to do that. And then we worked together to co-write and shape this impact report. So I highly recommend that you download the report and take a look at it. It's still being used by the documentary industry as a tool, because like we talked about earlier, this is a very complex and challenging topic. And yet we were able to reach a lot of people. And that is really the legacy of the film. along with its ability and success in elevating Joanne MacArthur's work, which is called We Animals. So those are the two sort of legacy parts of the film. Its ability to have a wide-reaching audience and impact, and its ability to actually be a platform to elevate a person and their work in the world. And, you know, documentary really does have that ability. I've seen it over and over again. There's all kinds of films that have touched me and impacted me and that I'm still thinking about. And impact is almost in a way its own kind of, as you said, it's a buzzword, but it's also kind of like, it's its own genre in our documentary world, where films have the power to create political change or social change or consciousness raising change. And they're used as tools, and there are now impact producers. And, you know, Australia actually is one of the pioneering countries in this field. Canada's just starting to get into it. The US, the UK, Australia have been leaders. Canada's catching up, and other parts of the world as well.
I'll just go back a step. I think one of the questions I was going to ask you was, you know, how do you measure success and impact of a film? And then I looked at the public engagement strategy document, which I do highly recommend everyone reads, and it's quite clear how you measure that success. I think I think some of the stats are like outreach on Facebook reached more than 9.3 million people, which leads to a fan base of, you know, 30,000 users. There's 250,000 visitors. There's, you know, you can see the kind of knock-on effect from, you know, huge reach, and then people that then take the reach and then, you know, make it part of their lives. But I'm just going to pull up a couple of the percentages that are in there about modifying behavior, because it's a thing with impact is like, it's very well, you can reach a huge amount of people, but how do you actually quantify whether they make changes in their behavior or not? And I think this film's an excellent example of, you know, first of all, with your analysis of the statistics, you can actually quantify whether people have made change or not. And I think just some of these stats already show that. So 66% of people talked about animal issues more often, which is huge. So we've gone from, you know, 66% more people talking about this than there's an issue. 61% reduced animal products as part of their diet. 47% learned or are in the process of learning about animal rights. And 47% started buying more cruelty-free products. There's a whole bunch of other statistics as well, but I think those four kind of sum it up quite clearly. And I think if you're, you know, rewinding back to 2010 and thinking, what is my outcome and what am I trying to achieve by this journey? Because it's a big journey to go on a film, you know, like this with this particular topic and, you know, going through it. What am I going to achieve at the end? I guess I imagine this is quite, you've got there perhaps in a way. Do you feel it's a successful endeavor?
I do. I mean, you know, there's other documentaries that have a much more kind of massive reach, but this film, you know, I think it just continues to be part of a canon of films that, you know, are waking people up to a moral issue that was not previously on our radar, you know? So yes, I do consider it, you know, successful in that way.
I think it'd be good just to, we're sort of running to, we've got 5 or so minutes left. I think it just with impact, did you plan for, like, did your impact campaign and strategy evolve organically as the film journey started, or were you very clear about it was going to be there's impact, then there's the film, we need to have a team that are doing this, and I need to be the filmmaking team in this place? How did you approach the actual strategy?
I just jumped into it and considered it an impact film from the very get-go. And, you know, again, just for the sake of our timeline, what that meant was, you know, we started filming in 2011. And the film was released in 2013. And so it was an unfolding kind of approach. You know, sometimes impact campaigns happen once a film is fully complete and then it's being disseminated. through different distribution channels. Whereas with the Ghosts in Our Machine, we started right away building a core audience, building or attracting the core audience, I should say, and mobilizing them around this film. And it was tremendous in that way. I would say we expanded the core audience.
Excellent. And do you have any advice for aspiring filmmakers who want to make an impact film from the start?
Yes, I love this question. And I love also sort of singling out in a way like female, like women who want to, and non-binary, like people that, who are really passionate about this and maybe have some trepidation or questions, or maybe some don't know where you're going in your path with it, or feel intimidated in some way, shape, or form. I would say, and based on personal experience with this, learn as much as you can about the craft. So, shoot, edit, work with friends on their projects as well. Watch as many films as you can. And that includes fiction. I never limit my interest in filmmaking just to the nonfiction form. I love fiction. In fact, I'm sitting here at the Joy Kagawa House in Vancouver as a writer in residence, working on my first fiction script. I'm so excited about that. Film is film, but get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves, watch films. So important to watch films, and follow your passion, follow your heart. And I think a great way to meet filmmakers so that you feel that you start building a community and tapping into a sense of community, that's essential. We need to feel that we're not alone on our journey with this. I know in Canada, for example, and I know in Australia as well, lots of places in the world, there are documentary organizations that you can become a member of, or a club. But get connected to other emerging and mid-career and veteran filmmakers. Get a mentor. I had a mentor, Shelley Saywell. She was tremendous in terms of mentorship along the way. She's still a mentor, a really good friend now too. But these are all things I believe in, because we are a global community of filmmakers, and tapping into that will give you a sense of belonging and inspiration. And community is really important, especially during this pandemic. And watch films and make films. Just do it. Just do it.
Completely 100% agree. The only thing I would add to that is, when just in the idea of community, is that we're a community that work together. I don't feel like there's no need to be competitive with other filmmakers. I feel like it's really important for us to grow that network and know that we can actually help improve each other's films, and also make the financing landscape different. There's a whole bunch of ways that we can, if we work together, it actually becomes a stronger kind of community.
Totally, 100%. I echo that.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, which is a shame. I have so many questions I wanted to ask that I didn't get quite around there. But I guess I'll just ask one final question, which is there anything you would have done differently?
Oh, geez. I'm sure tons of things. But then if I did it differently, then there's so many things that I could have done differently. Let's say that. But then I wouldn't be exactly where I am right now. I would say, I don't know how to answer that question.
I think
I think, here's something, because I have, a young woman who's an emerging filmmaker that is on my team. She's wonderful. She's my coordinator. And, I'm able to give some mentorship to her along the way. And she's a really good, natural cinematographer, but she wants to direct. And I keep telling her, don't give up cinematography because you want to direct. In fact, cinematography could be your bread and butter while you're honing and learning directing. And see, what I did, that reminds me of myself in a way, because I love cinematography. I love being behind the camera. And I worked for a bit in the field and was hired as a woman cinematographer back in the early to mid 2000s. And then I left it because, in retrospect, I think because of sexism within the industry, I felt sort of a glass ceiling there, but also because I thought, okay, I just need to narrow my focus and be laser focused on directing. But in fact, maybe what I could have done is continued to hone those skills as a cinematographer and make more money, hint, hint, while I was, venturing out and directing. So it's a hard thing, because at some point you do need to decide if you're going to really truly master or work towards mastering what it is that you're doing. But I would say, and especially to young women, emerging women filmmakers, is that if you have a love for image making and cameras and cinematography, please do it. We need more women behind the camera, and also women directors. We need more women directors, we need more women in all of this, obviously, but it's great if there's more women. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, in key creative roles. And I think it's also worth just going back to your point about being behind the camera and stuff. It's like great directors have often come from an editing background or a cinematography background, because they understand how to pull the story together. And they know what happens when you don't get all the bits that you need when you sort of pull it together in that way. But I think just, more diversity of voices across the spectrum, creates a bigger suite of stories for people to watch and to understand. And so if we as filmmakers are looking to illuminate the world around us, you can only truly illuminate it if there's a lot of, different perspectives that are sort of doing that illuminating. So I think, yes, be encouraged, particularly if, if you're feeling, if it feels like daunting, even more reason to do it, I would say, because
yes,
you're pioneering ground that probably hasn't gone there before. And I think on that note, we're going to have to wrap up. We have gone a little bit over time, and the EFFA have been very kindly let us go on a little bit longer. So thank you very much to the team doing that. And Liz, thank you very much for your time and for your insight. It's invaluable, and it was a great chat.
Oh, it's really my honor and privilege to do this, and also to meet you and for you to moderate this. And thanks again to EFFA, the Environmental Film Festival Australia. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Take care and see you again.